I just remembered why I don't wear glasses. You can see everything. It's like an infinity mirror. I wanted to wear them because it's comfortable today. But right when I put the camera up, I remembered why I don't. So anyway, fear is something I want to talk about today, and how fear connects with mental health in, I think a pretty profound way. There's a handful of like emotions and thought processes that are harmful pretty much across the board, and fear is one of them. It's not a useful tool, and I think the best colloquialism argument I've heard in favor of fear is that bravery only comes in the face of fear, and I think that's a really cool statement. I'm not here to explicitly deny the utility of fear, but maybe reframe a little bit of the difference between fear and anxiety and concern or preoccupation. And I think most anxiety is fear. It's fear of the unknown, which is often connected to the future. Well, exclusively probably connected to the future. It's a fear of something presented as anxiousness, because you're not sure what's going to happen, so you stress about it. But fear, generally speaking, is not a super useful tool. It doesn't happen in a very logical or prefrontal cortex way. It happens more amygdala, happens more limbic system, even brainstem if we're in fight or flight. I'm a huge fan of the brain state model, which is used a lot in conscious discipline parenting, which I think is pretty good. But from conscious discipline, the thing that I use the most is the brain state model, which breaks down 3 primary sections of the brain, and your prefrontal cortex, your logical brain, your limbic system or emotional brain, and then your brainstem or your survival brain, reptilian brain, some people say. Now, the further back you get, the less thinking that you're doing and the more reacting that you're likely doing, which you can still make good decisions in those states, but they're probably going to be a guess. They're not going to be thoughtful, because the further away from your thinking brain, your logical prefrontal cortex brain that you get, the less that you're going to be thinking clearly, if at all, to some extent. So fear is not something that's going to be happening in a clearly thinking mind, which is why I think when people act bravely in a state of fear, I wouldn't feel super confident saying entirely that they're acting in a state of fear. More that they're understanding the danger of what could happen. And I think still saying I'm afraid of this is okay, but it's very logical. It's not this debilitating fear that keeps you from making decisions. It's an afraid of this could go south, but I'm thinking clearly enough to know that I'm going to step into this and do the right thing, which is scary because I don't know what's going to happen, but I know that it has to be done on my end in a certain way. So some of that can get a little bit into semantics, but hopefully painting a picture of the state of mind that's happening when these decisions are being made. So, generally speaking, a state of positive mental health is not a state of fear. So, what specifically about fear is important? So, I just realized I have alerts on, seeing messages come in, recording on my phone, which seems to never happen when I record. I didn't even notice that in the past. Let me backpedal. When trying to make healthy decisions, making those decisions in a state of fear is not going to be useful. Fear can look like different things. Fear can look like my life is in danger. Fear can look like needing money. Fear can look like needing food. It can be desperation because you're afraid that you won't have what you need. This is why people steal a lot. It's not the only reason why people steal, but a lot of times people steal because they need something and they're afraid they're not going to get it. And sometimes it's because they won't, and other times it's they will and they'll be fine. So fear can cause you to do irrational things, and it can also cause you to make decisions that you wouldn't normally make. It's also why a lot of people stay at really bad jobs, is because they're afraid that they won't find a better job. Even if this one's not good, it's not bad enough. This is the beta region paradox, I believe, of it would almost be beneficial for something to be worse. So a situation is not great, you know, you got a job and it pays pretty good. You make a little bit more than your friends, and you know, you get 3 weeks off a year, and they're really generous with government holidays off, and you know, there's a chance for a bonus. Your boss isn't the worst boss you've ever had, you know, so you know, I'm gonna stay because it's okay. It's kind of the same idea where people say, you know, the better the devil you know than the devil you don't. I at least know this, it's familiar, right? Because a new thing is scary. It fills you with fear because it's new and different. And that will also keep people doing things that aren't good for them because at least it's familiar. It's why people might go home and, you know, take some verbal abuse and maybe take a little bit of physical abuse from a partner when it's predictable, and not leave because they at least know what to expect with that person. They know when they're going to be angry. They know how to brace for emotional or physical impact. But who knows, if they find someone else, they might be worse. The issue is we're not thinking about what might be better out there. And there's an issue with that. Some people are always chasing the next high, and that's not necessarily helpful either. And I would argue that they might also be living in fear because they're afraid of their high to come down. So they're serial monogamists, right? They go dating this person, sleep with this person, sleep with this person. It's not healthy. And same with people who are always seeking new experiences to a point of it's always happening. You know, we need to slow down a little bit to connect, and people can be afraid of falling off of an emotional high or an exhilarating high in the same way that they can be afraid of stepping into a situation that's worse or scarier, so they won't take any action at all. And this is fear holding people down and holding people back, and it's not very useful to them. It's also not very useful to the world because it usually means that you are not likely doing the thing that you need to be doing in life. When we're in a constant state of fear, I believe very strongly that people are not made to be fearful. They're made to be joyful and to thrive in a purposeful and meaningful way and to have fulfilling lives. That doesn't mean we control everything, but it does mean we control what we can when we can, and that we take action as necessary for overall good for ourselves and others. So if we're constantly debilitated by fear, that probably means that we need to figure out a way to step out of that. And I think what's interesting with that is one of the most common ways to combat fear is to physically act on it, not just think differently. If I'm afraid of something, I can step into it and see if it's actually warranted. So one example is, you know, if someone finally has a little bit of extra money and they want to invest, maybe they want to save for a house or a car or even a vacation or for retirement or something, and they've never had any extra, and so they've never saved for anything, and now they are doing well at their job and they make more than they spend, and they're like, well, at the end of every month I have $500 leftover dollars, and what do I do with it? So they might be afraid to invest because they might lose it, or I'm afraid to save for a house because the bank could crash, or I'm afraid to save for a car for this reason, that reason, this reason, that reason, and so they just go spend it, and they're like, I'm just gonna have some fun with it. That's acting in fear still. It's one thing to say I want to have fun with this money because I've never had money, and that's a different question for what's healthy there or what's not. But if that's kind of the starting place, then that's not necessarily acting out of fear. Although depending on the person, it could be, because they might spend it because they're like, oh, well, I'm not the type of person that ever has leftover money, so let me use it while I have it. That's fear. So, and it's very short-term fear versus a long-term concern where it's like, all right, I want to save for the future, but I might lose it, so I'm stopping out of fear. You can be concerned that it might disappear. It happens to people from time to time, but we know by looking at the world around us that if you invest, it's likely not going to disappear, assuming you're not throwing everything into volatile investments and just crazy stuff. And there's people who do that for a living. They teach you how to invest, or saving for a home or a car. So it's a form of delayed gratification, and also built on hope that the money that you are saving is still going to be available in the future to use. And that's a really big part, because you can argue, and it's true, that it might not be available in the future. And that does happen to some people. The issue is that a lot of times when people talk themselves out of something good, and they use a reasoning like, well, it doesn't work for everyone, so I don't want to risk it. And then they'll go and do something riskier. So say, I don't want to save for tomorrow because some people, they don't have that money by the end of their life, and they can't retire anyway. So I'm just going to go spend the money and have fun. Okay, so it's a risk that you might not have it in the future, and you're trading that for a guarantee that you won't have it in the future. So this is riskier, because what you're actually now betting on is that you're going to be okay long term, or that you're just going to die young and you don't have to worry about it. So there's a lot more actions that happen in fear than I think people realize. People are making more fear-based decisions than they know. And I think what tricks a lot of people is they think they're thinking logically, but then they get in this preservation mindset. So, wanting to make a lot of money because of some sort of fear of not having, and then you just work yourself to death, and you think, well, I'm securing my future, but you might just be in a hyper-preservation mindset. You're always afraid of losing, and that's why you're working for it, as opposed to trusting that there's enough to go around and that you'll be okay if you just work hard. And I know there's disagreements on that, but generally speaking, and as far as anything I can tell, this is absolutely true. If you just work hard, you will do okay. Plain and simple. And that's not just at work. That is working hard to not have bad relationships that pull you down. That's working hard to set appropriate boundaries. That's working hard to honor commitments, like if you're married, or if you've gone into a business agreement, or if you've taken out loans to do everything in an honorable and right way. You're probably going to be fine, more likely than not. And using an argument that says, well, some people don't turn out fine, to me it's just not a good argument, because you can say it about absolutely anything. But if you were confident that you'd be okay, you would maybe do that. Maybe not. There's definitely some value assessment in there, but you have to believe that you can do okay. One of the things that I see as a big challenge for people in therapy is hope. No, I refuse to work with anyone that I don't have hope for them, which, spoiler alert, has never happened. And if it starts to happen, I won't tell someone, hey, you're hopeless. Because the way I see it is, if they show up in my office, they're still thinking things can get better. So in my mind, it's not really possible for me to lose hope if they're still showing up. And even then, I'll still hope that they find their way in the end. But if you want to change your life, you have to believe that you can. Because if you're looking for reasons why it can't be true, you will find them. And this is true on both sides of that spectrum. If I'm looking for failure, I will find failure. If I'm looking for an excuse to be unworthy and not valuable and worthless and just a waste of time and always messing up, I will find that every day of my life. That's what I'm looking for. But if I'm looking for excuses on the positive end to encourage myself, if I'm looking for examples of me being a good person, decent person, of me doing something well, of me working hard on my relationships, trying at my job, putting power and interest into my activities and my hobbies, I'm going to find those things because that's what I'm looking for. There's so many examples of what I'm about to say, but it's the example that people use for various reasons of if you're looking for a certain color car, you're going to find that color car. I hear that a lot with red. People bring it up with red cars. They'll say, hey, how many red cars have you seen today? And someone will be like, I don't know. And then if you said, hey, I'll give you $100 for every red car you see between now and tomorrow, you're going to really be looking for red cars and you're going to find them. So you'll find what you look for. And I think people get slipped up with that all the time. Like, I'm trying so hard to have a better life. And a lot of them just aren't. And that's, I think, really kind of awful to say in some sense, but they're not. They might be trying harder than they used to, but they're continuously giving into negative thoughts. They're continuously giving into bad habits. And this is not, you can get into things like addiction and completely trained pathways of negativity. So this takes effort to get out of. That's why you want to look for a trend out. You don't expect someone to come to therapy, come in, boop, now they're great, and now they just sustain. You want to watch for a trend away from negative outcomes towards positive outcomes in their life, which might mean 2 years of still negative outcomes, but less and less negative. So, someone who self-harms and berates themselves constantly, and you've been in therapy for a year, and they self-harm with 75% less frequency as they used to, and they only talk negatively about themselves when something bad happens, versus they self-harmed every day and they talk down to themselves every interaction, that person's doing great. But you wouldn't say they're doing well necessarily, because they're still harming themselves, but it's only a quarter of the time now. And they're still talking bad about themselves, but it's only when they mess up. So those are still two things that you want to get rid of and to stop doing, but that person's doing well. So sometimes coming back out of pain has a ton of growth before you go out. It's like jumping into a pool. If you jump off a diving board and go into a pool and you go really far underwater and you have to swim to the top. And especially if you're not a diver and you don't do that very often, I think for some of us it can be a surprise how long it takes to get to the top, because you're building up a lot of momentum heading down and you break the surface tension and you go really far under. You're probably going to go deeper than if you just jumped from the edge and you start to swim up, and it takes longer. But you don't think that you're swimming down still, but you still know that you're underwater. It's the same when you're paying off debt. You have $100,000 of debt and you're working your butt off and you're paying off $2,000-$3,000 a month, maybe, like just crazy hitting it. That's still going to take a couple years to pay off. But if you're a couple years into that and you're like, I got my debt down from $100,000 to $50,000, you're not going to go, oh, I've done nothing. You should look at that and say, I've chopped it in half. I'm still underwater and I'm still broke and I'm in debt, but I'm halfway out of this. And so hope is important with that. And if your hope is only bent on a perspective of I'm doing okay and good and just great, that won't work, because you'll find reasons why that's not true. You'll say, well, I'm still in debt, or I'm still talking negative to myself. It's not the right metric. It's not a metric of, are you still doing this or not? It's, is it better? Is it better? And maybe you can get to a point of elimination, but it's the same when I work with people who relapse or who are working on habits and they're falling off. They say, well, I'm back to day one. I will tell them, no, you're not at day one. You've been trying this for 300 days and you've messed up once. So out of 301 days, you have one mess up. Tomorrow's not day one. It's day 301. And during that time, you've messed up once versus you're messing up every day. That's phenomenal improvement. You're not where you need to be yet, but it's fantastic. And you should be able to point out and have things to show for that as well. So, someone who's getting drunk every night and waking up hungover, they should be able to notice physical health benefits, likely some weight loss, likely some cognitive stability, likely better sleep and dreams overall, because getting blackout drunk is not sleeping, it is passing out. Your hippocampus is shutting down, and that's not good. So your sleep's going to be, all these other things are going to be better, and then you have one night and it's going to suck and you're going to wake up feeling like crap, but you've had 300 nights prior of like fantastic, way better. So you just maintain as best you can, and you do aim for a no relapse lifestyle, especially if that's what you need. But you can't just summarize it as starting over from day one. I think it's fine if you want to track that, but it can't ignore the 300 days that you've been successful. So for someone like that, if they really want to track it, I would say keep your start day 300 days of well done and one mess up day. And then it's also okay to have your X amount of days without an incident, so to speak. And that can start over at 1, and you can say my record's 300, now I'm on day 2, but that can't speak louder than the overall benefit you're doing. This is the same thing with trying to live your life in a way that you have a clean conscience about your actions. Is just try to tip the balance towards positive and towards good. So if you are saying, I've done so much wrong in my life, then start doing the right thing. You might say, I can't ever balance it out. Just start. You can make it worse, can't you? And they'll be like, yes, I can still make it worse. Why can't you make it better? I have a ratio of 1,000 problems I've created for every one I've solved, and I'm beating myself up over it. Or if I have a client doing that, listen, for every one good thing I do, I've done 1,000 bad things. Okay, would you prefer that every one good thing you've done 1,100 bad things? Say no. Would you prefer for every one good thing you've done 900 bad things? Is that better? Like, I mean, yeah, it's better. Then just go for that. Is it balanced out? No. That's actually still pretty bad. But it is better than the guy who's doing 1,000 for every one good deed. Just keep moving that. And it's never too late. If you're 70, you're right. You might not ever balance that out fully. Doesn't matter. Just do a good thing and make a good change, and don't be afraid of imbalancing it. And you're still going to mess up along the way. You're not going to only do good things. But you're going to keep growing. And if you're 20 or 30, you're absolutely going to be able to balance that out. And probably in no time, actually. And honestly, by the time you balance it out, if I had to guess, you're not going to be thinking about the scoreboard, because that's not something that you do when you feel okay with the person that you are. You're not thinking about all the things you mess up. And people forget that a lot when it comes to being hopeful instead of fearful. Fearful is always watching for the negative, and hopeful is just looking for the positive. You're not going to get hung up on the bad things you've done as much and the places you've messed up. You're going to be able to address it and own it and acknowledge it, and even confess it and have consequences at times for it. But you're not going to just hold on to it in the same way. And people often think that when they're happy, they're going to be like a version of themselves today, but happy. You're not. You're going to be very different, because you're changing the way that you view the whole world. It's probably likely that a lot of your philosophy is wrong about how you look at the world, and it's probably been taught to you that way. You have a very negative perspective. And if that's not working, you're going to have to change that perspective. And some people like living with a negative perspective and a nihilistic viewpoint and a down and out mindset. And if you like that, then you're not going to be wanting help. But if you want that to change, it's going to change. It's not just going to be your outcomes that change. And that's another really important factor. Common example, people talk about really wealthy people, and they say, I want that money. And they don't usually think about what you have to do to get that money. Obviously, barring the exceptions of, I shouldn't say obviously, but that's barring exceptions of people who literally inherited everything that they have, literally everything. But people often look at, actually a better example is someone who's really fit. You look at someone and you're jealous of their body. You have to know that they put effort into that, especially if they're not on steroids or anything. And they put effort into doing that. Anyone who's skillful at anything, you look at a musician that's amazing, and you're like, I want to be that good. That means you also are going to want to have to put in the effort. And if you don't want to put in the effort, then you don't want to be that good. That's asking for the finished product without any of the creation in between. So if you want to be a happier person and you want to have a more joyful and positive experience and perspective on the world, you will have to change. You can't be a fearful person and be hopeful. You can't have joy and anxiety. These things don't work at the same time. You have to pick one. And yes, I know it's not as simple as just picking. But you're going to be making votes every day for which one that you aim for. And it's going to be really difficult for a lot of people. And being able to overcome it's going to be a huge deal. And then you can absolutely do anything after you've proven that to yourself. The people who are closest to rock bottom and can pull themselves out can do absolutely anything with like no effort once you figure out how to do that. So that's the one benefit of doing really hard things, is that it sets a new bar for what hard is. That's true of like anything. If you've ever done a public speaking event or something like that, and that crowd for most people is going to be easy to do anything that size or smaller now. Same if you've ever ran a 5K, you're probably not going to be that intimidated by running anymore. A marathon might intimidate you, but an ultra runner who does a 100-mile race, they're not going to be intimidated by a marathon, because like I've done that. I do it 3 times, 4 times in my ultra marathon. I'm not concerned. So we set new bars by doing hard things, and that's the trade-off. So when you do not very difficult things, you set a bar of pretty weakness, pretty low, weak self for you. You just feel like I can't do it. So you have to prove to yourself, and you can do that by stepping up the intensity each time, which is why I said you don't go from, hurting yourself daily and negative self-talk every day to perfect. You take steps. So if you can pull yourself halfway out of that, then everything below that bar, you know that you can do again in the future. That doesn't mean you have permission to beat yourself up about it when you're not doing it, but it does mean, hey, I've done that before, so I can do it again. And it's okay to have moments where you feel a little defeated and discouraged. It's not about making like a Stepford wife, everything is perfect mentality. It's just believing in yourself and believing in the systems that you've built around you, hopefully good relationships, good environments. So, if you're wasting all your time with video games and television, get rid of your TV. I know that sounds dramatic, but gosh, it's one of the things one biblical verse that gets on me, like every time I read it, is I'm not going to say it right, but essentially Jesus is like, cut off your hand if it causes you to sin, pluck your eye out if it causes you to sin. It's better to enter the kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven with missing limbs than it is to go into hell, essentially. And separate conversation of literal or figurative speech there, the idea is the same. It is better to have this pain for this type of salvation than no pain for this type of torture. Everyone can relate to that, and I don't think they always realize it. Using the TV example, if every night you go home and you eat dinner in front of your TV and you watch your TV for 2 hours, and you finish dinner and you're snacking because your show's still on and it's all crap food or whatever, and then you switch over to a video game and you play that for 2 or 3 more hours, maybe even longer, and you pour yourself some whiskey or grab a couple beers, and then it's like 1 or 2 a.m. at that point, and you gotta be up at 7, and you really don't thrive on 5 hours of sleep, but you do it anyway. And you do that every single night, and then by the time you get home, you're like, I just need to rest because I'm so exhausted, even though you set yourself up for failure the day before. I need to rest, I'm so exhausted. I'm just gonna watch some TV, eat this food. I'm not feeling it for cooking. I got fast food on the way, or I'm gonna make this crap food, have my dessert, have my beer, my whiskey, and play my games. So nothing I said there is inherently bad in some form of moderation. So when you do that every day, that's the same thing as entering hell. When you are noticing, like, I'm in pain every day, and I come home, I do this, I don't want to do it, but I do it again. I'm going to reiterate, I don't care if anyone goes home and watches TV, if anyone gets fast food, eats a dessert, drinks some alcohol, plays a game. It's this idea of stacking all that together while knowing that you need to be getting sleep, or you need to go exercise, or you need to spend time with your family, or like that there's things you need to do. But you're choosing this pain because it's become a habit, and then it sets your next day up for failure, and then you try to get the day back because you failed the night before. So you punish yourself by failing again the next day because you're trying to steal back joy. When, a person like that, what you might actually need is you need to get rid of your TV. And I'm being dramatic on purpose. Get rid of your TV, switch from smartphone to a flip phone. Now you have no way of watching things when you get home. And you have no way to play your games, and you're going to be really bored out of your mind right away because you're not going to know what to do when you get home. But you will eventually start to replace it with something else. And that's where you have the opportunity to replace it with good habits for yourself. And I think that's part of what that biblical message is saying, and part of how you can understand. If you can just maintain hope and not act in a state of fear, you can start to build in good habits for yourself. That doesn't mean you can't enjoy things. I mean, I'm being really strict with a diet that I'm doing right now for myself and an exercise routine, and I took 5 days to go visit family, and I wasn't overly concerned. I didn't go off the deep end, still exercised a bit, still was a little bit mindful of things I was ingesting, but wasn't overly concerned. I was enjoying time with people. I couldn't do that every weekend, and I couldn't go on vacation every week, but I can do it sometimes. So all that's to say, do what you can to not live a life in fear. And I think this could be talked about. I could probably do a couple weeks of this in different categories, but it is to bring it back to therapy and mental health fully. You cannot, I would argue, be extremely successful and be full of fear all the time. You can't. If you want good outcomes in a mental health perspective, learn how to have an abundance mindset, believing that there's enough for everyone, that you don't have to fight and kill and struggle. There's enough for everyone. You can be okay. And 2, you have to hope, and you have to be hopeful that the change you're looking for exists. If you can do those 2 things, you can hold on a lot longer. And if I added a 3rd one, it would be look for the positive and look for the change that you want. Look for the opportunities to work out. Look for the opportunities to be grateful. Look for the opportunities to be the version of you that you want to be. Start doing those 3 things and just see what happens. I think people would be surprised. So that's what I got for today. I'm going to start ending these with a little bit more info. If you're looking for therapy options, you can find me in Kansas and Missouri for in-person and online therapy. If that's something you want. Or if you're not interested in me and you're out of my jurisdiction to do work, I'm happy to help. I think finding, and by happy to help, I mean I'll find you resources. I can't see you if you're not in those 2 states. Anyone in Kansas, Missouri, I can see you virtually or in person. And anyone outside of that or looking for someone else, I can help you find that. I know getting therapy can be very difficult, so if you want it, reach out. You can find my contact in the description, and just let me know what you need, and I'll do what I can to help. Thanks, y'all.